New Haven's first female mayor, 72-year-old Toni Harp, has held the Elm City's top spot for 3 terms. She says she's not done yet.
People want to be in New Haven. We don't have to beg them to come anymore. They want to come themselves.
The former alderman and longtime state senator says New Haven has made great strides during her time as mayor, but she says she has more work to do.
We've done a really great job on violent crime, but we've got to now work on property crime issues.
Primary day is Tuesday.
Hi everybody, I want to welcome you live to the News 8 newsroom here, where we are joined by New Haven Mayor Toni Harp on the eve of primary day here in the city of New Haven. Her challenger Justin Ellicker was here a moment ago, and the mayor's here now to talk a little bit. We've got some time here, Mayor, so we want to talk a little bit about your life. Sure. We will touch on some of the important policies in the city of New Haven. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Your life story, I think, is so interesting, and I think some folks in New Haven know your story and some may not. First off, you're a mom and a grandmother as well, right?
That's right.
And you have 3 grown children, right?
I have 3 adult children, yes.
Tell me about your 3 adult children.
So my oldest is Dajana, and she works at Southwest Community Healthcare Clinic and at St. Vincent's Hospital. She's an OBGYN. Okay. And my second is Jamil. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and she's also an OBGYN and pelvic floor specialist. Wow. And then my son lives here. He is an attorney, but has a management firm called, used to be called Renaissance. It's called Abacus Renaissance, and manages a number of properties throughout the city.
Well done, not bad. as I've still got some coming up through the ranks here. Your life is quite a story. You were born in California, right?
Right.
Your birth mom was a teenager.
Yes.
Who wasn't quite equipped at that point to raise you, right?
She wasn't. Tell
me about that. So your grandparents wound up raising you, right?
They did. I always think of myself in the Moses story, because they always said that my aunt came to get me in San Francisco, put me in a basket, and got on the train and took me to my grandparents.
And your grandparents were in Salt Lake City?
They lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, right. And my grandmother was a janitor for the Greyhound bus station. Mm-hmm. And my father, I call him my father, my grandfather technically at that point, was a Pullman porter. He worked for Santa Fe Railroad. So they both had good union jobs, and I was the youngest. My father used to call me the caboose because I was the end of the line for them. Right. I guess he hoped. But at any rate, yeah, I grew up with them, and they were great parents. I was adopted by them when I was about 5 years old. Prior to that time, they helped me through polio, and so...
well, let's get to that. I mean, there's a lot of chapters to this. I thought it was interesting. I read that you were the only black student in your middle school in Salt Lake City. Is that right?
That's right. I went to Roosevelt Junior High School. We had junior high schools back then, and I was the only black student there.
How does that had to, in some way, shape your thoughts about a lot of things, including about race? Well, I don't know, perhaps how there are more similarities and differences, or what did that do for you?
Well, you know, I grew up in a community where, again, there were not a lot of black people, so I had friends of all races. But I remember a story. I was in the 7th grade. There was a young girl named Sally who was a friend of mine. She didn't live too far from where I lived. And the teacher basically was having us correct each other's work. We'd written stories and we could give grades. And so I gave her a grade, she gave me a grade. The teacher picked up what she had given me and said she couldn't have gotten that grade. She's black, and he tore it up. And that absolutely devastated both me and Sally. Yeah. So I understood that, you know, from early on, that there were people that had these ideas about what certain people could and could not do.
Right.
But I knew it wasn't everybody, because I think that hurt Sally as much as it hurt me.
Right, right. And you talked about the fact that you also had polio as a young child, spent some time in an iron lung, right?
I did, you know, and it was, I remember that because I lost the ability to walk.
You were a little girl, 4 years old?
I was about 4 years old, and I also had trouble breathing. Mm-hmm. And back then, I think even today, they really don't know how to cure polio. And so they would wrap these wool blankets, warm wool blankets on our legs to try to help. And I guess it helped, but now every time I smell that wet wool,
Right.
I think about that. And then they put us in an iron lung because it was before they had the kind of medical apparatus that they have today. And that was a tube that sort of pushed your lung
Made you breathe,
and made you
right?
breathe.
Yeah.
But it also it got warm, and it sort of made your neck rough. And so I remember having a towel over my head and a rough neck, and luckily I was only in the iron lung for about 2 weeks.
Wow. All right, well, listen, let's fast forward. Let's get to grad school at Yale, Yale School of Architecture.
So I went to Yale School of Architecture. I had
Why architecture? Build
Well-
grand buildings? What were you thinking?
But, you know, I actually had been working for American Society of Planning officials, and so I wanted to actually not do architecture, but to do planning. And so at that particular time, they had something called environmental design. And so I had come to Yale to look at environmental design, how design impacts behavior. And so that is what I did while I was at Yale.
So many people who come through Yale have a focus of their academics, but yet politics lurks in the background somewhere. Was politics on your radar at that point?
Well, you know what? It really wasn't. I finished my undergraduate work at Roosevelt University in Chicago, and I was aware of the way that politics and planning impact people's lives, and so I knew about that, but that really wasn't what I was interested in doing. I was really thinking about something that was called defensible space, and how the space actually makes it you more likely to become a victim of crime or more able to defend yourself. So, and even now we sort of look at the whole broken window syndrome as it relates to crime in communities. And so that's what I was interested in. I thought that would...
I mean, if for homes or public places to be built in this fashion?
Sure, and you know, you think about where do you put your bushes? How do you enter a facility? And so it was really all of those kinds of considerations around whether or not a place feels safe. Just today, we were out at Daniel's school, and one of the concerns that the principal brought to our attention was a little design issue that made it difficult to see who might be on one side of the building. And so all these things are there, little details that you often don't think about, but make a difference in terms of your overall safety.
Details that are in your background. That's interesting. So how do we get from there to being elected to the Board of Aldermen, which what is called at that time? How did you get to be a member of the Board of Aldermen?
Well, you know, I worked for the city of New Haven. As a matter of fact, I was a planner. I did social services planning, though not the type of planning that I'd actually studied. And all of our plans had to go to the Board of Alders for approval, and they could actually vote them up, vote them down, make changes. But they were the final deciders. They made the final decisions. And so I thought to myself, I want to be in a place where I'm the final decision maker. And so I went to my community and I said, gee, I think I'd like to be alder. And they said no.
They said no.
They said no. And so for a number of years, I just worked on board committees. And
Right.
then at a certain point in time, they said, are you still interested? You know, there are a number of us who'd like to support you.
Okay.
And I said yes. I ran and I won.
Yeah, well, which began a long string of winning here in New Haven. That lit your political fire, I'm assuming, then opening the door to you becoming a long time and becoming a powerful state senator here in Connecticut. Tell me about that transition from New Haven Board of Alders to the state senate.
You know, one of the things that was really clear, and it's still a problem today, is that so much of our property is tax exempt, which means that without support from the state, we don't have the resources to provide the services that are necessary in our city. And so I thought to myself, well, we've got to have the resources. So I thought that I would run for either state rep or at some point, or for state senate. And the state senate seat, became in play, and so I decided that I would run. There were several people. The incumbent was running, someone else is running, and I thought, well, I'll run. And so I ran, and I won. So I had an opportunity then to try to figure out, well, how do we get the resources into New Haven that we need to provide the services that we need to move the city forward, to be the kind of city that I think everyone has always recognized from the beginning, that New Haven is a place where you can come from anywhere and make a life for yourself and really become somebody, sort of act out your dream, and no matter where you're from. And so I thought, if there were more resources, more of the people that are here could really take that to the next level.
Okay, so after 22 years, was it, in the state senate, correct?
21.
21, okay. Then becoming, John DeStefano leaves. You become the first female mayor and first African-American mayor in New Haven history. That has to, I mean, you're in the history books. That's got to really feel like something, right?
Well, you know, I don't think I ever thought about being the first female mayor or the second African-American.
Let's think about it. I mean, that is historic, right? That's a glass ceiling shattered times 2.
And so I think that it is important. I think it's important to little girls that I see in New Haven Public Schools who see me as mayor, and they know that they can become mayor or more, and that makes a difference. It's and that warms my heart in many ways. But it's really the work that is really important, to make sure that our schools prepare that same little girl so that she can become the mayor, the head of a corporation, she can be an entrepreneur, and just define for herself what her life is going to be in a positive way, and have the emotional and mental energy to get her there.
What's the thing you're most proud of that you've accomplished as mayor of New Haven? One thing.
Well, I think the thing that is, I think our best accomplishment, in all honesty, is something called Community Youth Stat. And every single superintendent from the time I was on the Board of Alders, in the state senate, whenever there'd been a problem, a child had been killed in our community through gang violence, they always said to me, I could have told you that child would have been killed. I could have told you that that child would have pulled a trigger. And so when I became mayor, and Garth Harry said the same thing that all of the superintendents had said, I said, well, who's next? And truthfully, they really couldn't tell me who would be next. But what he could say is that there are a handful of indicators that this child might run into trouble, become disengaged. They're overage or undercredited. They are coming back to us from the juvenile justice system. They get into fights at school. They're DF students. And so I said to Garth, how many of these young people do we have in our community? He thought there were 250. And then when we really looked at the data, we discovered there were more like 550 of these young people. And so what we did was we recognized that these young people are likely to be in our criminal justice system. They're likely to be in our social services system, our parole, our probation system. We got everyone together, and we started trying to figure out, how do we work together to wrap services around these young people so they don't get in trouble. And we were able to use gray wall software so that we could plan in real time for these young people, joint planning, so every agency that touched their lives, the lives of their families, were at the table making plans for these young people.
Could communicate together.
Could communicate online. Since we've done that in the schools that we have operationalized, and that's all of our high schools, some of our middle schools, we haven't lost one kid. And so the fact that we're a city now that doesn't lose our children to gun violence is meaningful to me. And I think that we've done something that most other cities have not. And it's by coming together and problem solving on behalf of this population.
I don't have to tell you that the mayor of any city, and that includes New Haven, is, talk about problems, is a basket of problems to solve every day.
Oh, absolutely.
What's the one problem that you have been unable to fix in your time as mayor that gnaws at you? What's number one?
You know, one of the things that I worry about the most are the homeless people who live in our city. The people who are homeless, they are duly diagnosed, they have a substance use disorder as well as a mental health disorder. And we do more than any other city does in the state. We have $1.5 million in our budget. It's still not enough, because as we are seeing the prisons are releasing more and more people because it is expensive to keep them there when they should have services. They're coming here for services. Oftentimes there isn't enough housing nor supports for that population. I worry about that population the most, but we have some ideas that we're going to work on to move opportunities for housing, case management for this population forward.
Okay, let's talk about schools. The school system in New Haven has been in the news a lot lately. The superintendent has been in the news a lot. Controversy surrounding Dr. Carol Burks, the superintendent. First, there was a plan to eliminate 53 teaching positions. The Board of Ed voted against her. Recently, there was a last-minute change to the bus schedule that had a lot of parents in New Haven furious that they weren't communicated what was happening. There was a petition to remove the superintendent that got about 1,300 signatures. Does Superintendent Burks have your support today?
You know, I think that one of the things that we have to worry about is, you know, and I'm sure you're going to point out that we had a tax increase. We had a Board of Education, or New Haven Public Schools, that said that they had a $30 million problem starting this fiscal year that we expect them over time to reduce. In order to buy her out, which is what we would have to do, her contract, it would take likely over $500,000 or more. And so it's really, the question is, do I think that she's been given a chance? Can we afford to buy her out? I don't believe that she's been given a chance to show us what she can do. She got here, she's only been here for 1.5 years. And for the past half year, we've been in the middle of a contentious mayoral election. Some of the members on the Board of Education are on another side. So I don't believe that she's had the chance that she needs. But beyond that, I think that there have been some communication problems. I would say to you that absolutely, I've been begging her to do much better with communication, both to the parents and to the city. And we need a chief fiscal officer. That's the other position that we absolutely need. And so I think that we're going to be taking a look at her. We're going to be doing an evaluation this month, and we will make that decision together. But I don't believe that we can afford $500,000 to buy her out.
That means hiring her was a bad decision.
Well, I don't know if it was or not. I think that there were so many things that New Haven Public Schools let slide over the years. She came in and she wanted to make decisions that created change. Anytime you want to change something and do it radically, you lose friends, because things are the way they are because there's certain people who keep them that way, who are either in the system or not. And so I would say that her sort of radical change did not serve her well, and what I would have done if I were she, to have sort of moved change a lot slower. But I think the fact that the fiscal problems existed meant that she had to make radical change, and you know, it wasn't appreciated by a number of people in New Haven.
Let's talk about taxes. Last year, as you mentioned, you raised taxes 11% in New Haven. Controversial. Who likes a tax increase? Nobody, right? Your answers, the question was, it was either the tax increase or you were going to have to lay off some city positions. A lot of low-level folks were going to have to go. Easy to armchair quarterback this after the fact. You're saying that is the decision, that was the correct decision that had to be made, right?
It had to absolutely be made. Our budget has only gone up around 1.7% per year since I've been mayor. And so it's not a spending problem. Our problem is a revenue problem. And as I said to you before, if I didn't say it, I'll say it now.
Say it. Let's make sure.
56% of our property is tax exempt.
Right. Yale. We're talking about Yale and churches and.
We're talking about Yale. We're talking about Yale New Haven Hospital. Right. We're talking about churches. We're talking about all of the services that we have here in New Haven that we absolutely need. And so when we were cut by the state in the second quarter of the fiscal year, $9.5 million, we had to eat that cut. And so as a result, we had to make it up somewhere. And you know, you don't make it up on the backs of the most vulnerable workers. You know that we wouldn't be able to cut our police. We wouldn't be able to cut are fire. They are the higher earners. We've already cut almost every single department in our city by at least 40%. And so the real question that we would have to ask is, what services are we no longer going to actually provide to the residents of the city of New Haven? Because we will have had to have cut into almost the bone of our city through cutting, again, the employees who oftentimes earn the less. It would be, our paraprofessionals. It would be the folks who work in public works. It would be all of those kinds of positions that have already been cut. And we wouldn't be able to provide credible services to the people of New Haven.
Your opponent, Mr. Elliker, points out what he calls some spending problems in your administration, and none of this is news to you. You know what he's been saying. He criticized your trip to China, which in our reporting, the expense was a bit murky. We were first told it was a $20,000 trip, then it was a $50,000 trip. He criticized what he calls a lack of transparency about spending in your administration. Two questions. Number one is, have we reaped any reward from the trip to China yet?
Well, one of the things that we did when we went to China is that in all of the 3 areas that we visited, we didn't want to just go to meet the mayor of Changsha. They wanted to be a sister city to us. And we wanted to sign the papers. That was the original agreement.
When you say sign the papers, what do you mean
sign the papers? To agree to become sister cities.
Okay.
And so we wanted, since I was going over there and had to take a delegation, they always bring a delegation of at least 8. So we took a delegation of 5, and we went with Yale China. And so we decided that we would also try to discover whether or not there were companies that wanted to have a face on the East Coast of the United States. So we met with 10 companies. So we had to get a lead investigator to identify those companies for us. We had to also as well have interpreters when we went to meet with those companies. And so what has happened is one company has come to New Haven to look to see whether or not they would engage in business here in the city of New Haven.
So they came to visit to look at New Haven.
They came to visit to look at New Haven, so they invested their resources to come here and look. We haven't heard from them yet.
Do you know the name of that company?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can get it to you. And there's something in the Independent that shows them looking around at space that we have, so they absolutely did come.
Okay. We have to talk about this. There is an ongoing FBI investigation at City Hall. Again, this is not new territory here. Federal subpoena covering a wide array of issues. Our reporting shows that one of the subjects of the subpoena is city's former youth services director.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, tell me, and your one-time re-election campaign manager, Jason Bartlett?
No, actually what the subpoena asks for is information about programs. So Jason Bartlett's name is not in the subpoena at all. Okay. So it asks about the escape. And that's something that we've been working.
Which is the program we're looking at here. It's called the Escape.
It's called the Escape. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we know about New Haven is that we don't have shelters for teenagers. A lot of teenagers are homeless. And so we were in the process of trying to build that. They asked about that. There were some concerns about that. They asked about the burn grant that we've done for Newhallville. And that's a grant where we're trying to reduce crime largely in one of our communities that was most crime-ridden. They asked about what I would consider to be the boys' school, because they asked about a person that had done the planning on behalf of the boys' school. And then they asked about a series of companies. I don't personally know anything about those, but those were basically the 3 things that were asked about. Jason Bartlett's name did not appear as any person of interest or anything that they asked us specifically around his name to provide information for. But of course, he was director of youth services, and many of those, almost all of those programs were in youth services. So Jason Bartlett's name was not on the subpoena.
That investigation, regardless, still looms out there. Do you think that has or will have any impact on this election?
Well, it's possible because, the truth has been stretched to the point that it's almost irrecognizable. As you heard, I'm sure I've heard my opponent say many times this was about Jason Bartlett, and, he's never seen the subpoena, so I don't know where he gets that from. Ultimately, sure, because again, as I've said before, the truth has been spun in ways that make what has actually been requested and concerns irrecognizable.
All right. Well, we will wait and see how that all shakes out. Let's talk about, you're running a negative campaign spot now against Justin Elicker on our air here and elsewhere, talking about his use he wants to use police drones to spy on our neighborhoods, violating our rights. I also hear something about a mailer that went out. He says that is contorting of his position. He was talking about the difficulty of finding these ATV dirt bike guys running around on the streets. What's your answer to that? Is that a valid ad? He says it's not. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a valid ad. He wasn't altogether clear about how he would use the drones, and he said in certain neighborhoods, and he was very unclear about that. And for people who have been preyed upon by, often feel preyed upon by the police, it's concerning.
We asked our viewers, what are your questions for both of these candidates? We got this more than anything about parking. Mm-hmm. People mad about they can't find a spot to park. When they do, it costs too much. Is that something that's just inherent in a city? Is there a solution? I know you hear that at City Hall too, right?
We do. Actually, we're a city of 18.7 square miles. Almost everything that people would like to go to happens downtown, and there is very little parking, but people also don't want to park in our parking lots. We're a very walkable city, and what I would argue is that think about the parking lots, park in the parking lots, and walk to where you want to go. Our parking lots are really inexpensive. Park New Haven does a great job, and so if you think like you would think about New York City, for example, most people know that if they're going to drive there, they're going to have to park in a parking lot. And so I would suggest that that's one way to solve the problem.
There you go. Now, if I can, this is indelicate, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway. You had a birthday recently?
I did.
You did. If I may, turned 72 years old.
Yep.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Number one. From where we sit, and we have a very good view of what's happening, you show no signs of slowing down. You could beat me in a race today, I'm sure.
Well.
Are there any thoughts? Do you have any thoughts of retirement? Is that even on your radar anywhere at this point?
There is just too much to do in New Haven. There are a lot of things that I'd like to get done. I have the energy to do it, and I'm looking forward to doing it for another 2 years.
Toni Harp has never lost an election in New Haven, correct?
I have not. And I don't intend to do so this time either.
As I would expect. Let me ask you this question. So if things do not go your way tomorrow, will you run in the general election?
I can run on the Working Families Party line, and I'll make that decision when the time is right.
I appreciate your time.
Okay, great.
Mayor
Thank
Toni
you.
Harp, thank you for your time.
You.
And a reminder, tomorrow night, we are the place to be. News 8, primary coverage, complete coverage. Tuesday, September 8th on News 8 on WTNH.com and our social media platforms. Mayor Toni Harp, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.